Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today I have sat down and I have painstakingly made a stack of books that I think I can comfortably say are my favorite books of all time. Now, I've done fantasy versions of this where I've talked about my top 10 fantasy and sci-fi books of all time. I've talked about my top 10 fantasy series of all time. And I like to kind of do those every once in a while just to kind of see how my tastes are changing, if there are books that are staying on that list or being replaced by something else. I think it's a really good rubric for me personally to kind of see where my reading goes throughout the years and which books really stay tightly bound to that favorites list, because I think that that's something that's really special. Now, I did manage to get 10 books on this stack, but I also pulled a book that I think I'm going to use as an honorable mention, because this is a book that I've only read once, and I can see myself adding it to a favorites list in the future because it's that good. I want to reread it, and I do very much intend to do that multiple times in the future. So let's just start with my honorable mention, and that is Augustus by John Williams. I read this last year and I was completely blown away by it. This is a fictitious epistolary novel that details the life and rise to power of Caesar Augustus, and the way that it is told. You guys, this isn't even an era of history that I am particularly drawn to, so when I went into this book, I wasn't anticipating it to leave as big of an impact on me as it did. I'm still thinking about it, I'm still talking about it, I'm still recommending this book to everyone who will listen. So it is a book that I can definitely say could eventually end up on the top 10 list, because it just is a beautifully written book. It's my favorite epistolary novel I've ever read, and I just think that John Williams' writing and characterization in this story is so incredibly beautiful. So I wanted to give it a mention because I think it deserves it. Now, this is going to be a mix, you guys. There is fantasy on this list, there's some sci-fi on this list, there's some books from my childhood on this list, there's some historical fiction on this list. So I'm really excited to share these with you guys. And you've probably heard me talk about all of these books on my channel at one point or another, but I think a couple of them might surprise you, especially the books that are coming from my childhood. So let's start off with a fantasy. This one is not going to be surprising to anyone. This is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time, and I talk about it on this channel a lot. And that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is a book that just completely blew me away. And I know that a lot of people talk about this book in terms of their love for the characters, but one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is just how incredible of a writer Scott Lynch is in terms of world building, in terms of dialogue, in terms of his characterization and the plot, and how he weaves the heist and the cons together in this story is just magnificent, and I love it so much. I cannot wait to reread this again and again because I love the motley crew in this story. I think that the world, honestly, is one of my favorites in fantasy. I think it's incredibly unique and interesting and just is so vibrant. I love tripping into a world that just feels so alive and so much its own. I love that about this book, and it is definitely up on my top 10 list. Next, I'm going to jump away from fantasy to a story that has really captured my heart since I was a teenager. I watched the film of this story first, and I think it is an incredibly faithful representation of the beautiful story that the author originally wrote, and that is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Now, one of the things about The Outsiders that I've always thought is really, really cool, especially as someone who was a young author myself, is that S.E. Hinton was 16 years old when she wrote this book, and man, like, wow. The Outsiders is one of the most gripping tales of friendship and brotherhood and coming of age and growing up in really difficult situations and found family and family bonds and all of those things all wrapped up into this tiny little package that packs the most massive punch ever. This book will make you cry, it will make you laugh, it will have you on the edge of your seat, and these young characters are just so incredibly vibrant and real and beautiful, and I cannot get over what an incredible story S.E. Hinton created. Next up, I'm going to jump into the historical fiction genre really quickly, and we're going to talk about a book by Michael Shara called The Killer Angels. I know you guys have heard me mention this before. This book details the story of several different regiments during the Gettysburg Battle of the Civil War. And what's really powerful about this story and about the other books in the series with it is just how human these authors make the characters who were real people who existed and fought and died and lived through the American Civil War. And that is a period of history that is really, really closely linked to my family. My grandfather is a Civil War historian. I have an ancestor who fought in this battle, and I've actually walked the battlefield where his unit would have been, which was an incredibly surreal experience that I will never forget. And The Killer Angels has some of the most gripping stories of just the horrors of war and the bravery and the courage of the men who fought in it. And I don't know how much more I want to say besides that, but there's a specific story in here about a unit called the 20th Maine that I have never forgotten. Ever since reading this book, it has stayed with me for years and years and years because it's just so haunting and gripping, and wow, like I'm losing my words about it, but this is an excellent historical fiction book. If you are interested in this time period of history at all, you really can't get better than Jeff and Michael Shara as authors. This is just peak S-tier historical fiction. Next, we're going to get a little bit lighter, and we're going to go back to a character and story that made me feel incredibly seen as a young girl, and that is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. I am currently reading this book with my daughters, and we are having an absolute blast, and I'm having so much fun voicing these characters, you guys. It has just been a blast. Anne is a young orphan girl who is adopted by an elderly couple on Prince Edward Island, and she is very much the type of child who would grow up to be a fantasy writer. She has a huge imagination. She is completely her own personality, and she is fearless in a lot of ways, and oftentimes when she shouldn't be. She gets into all sorts of mischief, but at heart she is a wholesome, wonderful little character who makes mistakes and makes friends and just changes the color of the world around her, and she is really, really lovely. And when I was a little girl, I was also a very skinny little redhead, and I appreciate Anne so much as a fictional character because I adored her story and her adventures when I was very young. And I have to say, as an adult on a reread, this book still makes me laugh out loud. I love these characters. It's such a breath of fresh air in terms of the storytelling and characterization. I really, really love this book still, even now as an adult. Now we're going to jump over to the memoir side of things with The Girl with Seven Names. This is a memoir written by Han-So Lee, and she is a North Korean defector who tells an incredibly harrowing story of escape and assimilation and the struggles that she faces not only in her home country of North Korea, but also all of the obstacles that she faced when she was able to escape the regime of North Korea and make her way to other countries. And that didn't end up being as much of an immediate sanctuary for her as perhaps it should have been. And this is a book that I recommend to almost everyone. There are very few books that I recommend without asking people what they like to read or what their favorite books are, for a lot of reasons, but this is a book that I would recommend to pretty much everyone to read because I think it is incredibly important as a story of our modern era. I think it's incredibly important just as a empathetic reader to hear stories like this of incredibly brave survivors, and I think that Hanso Lee's story is absolutely worth everyone reading it. Next up, we're going to go back to fantasy, and I'm going to hold up a book that I've probably talked about on this channel more than any other book, bar maybe a couple others on this list that are coming up. Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. This is book 2 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and this book changed my life as a fantasy reader and writer. It completely blew the doors open on what I discovered to be possible with writing fantasy, Erikson's character work and world building, and just the vastness of the world that he and his co-creator Ian C. Eslamont have created in this story is just absolutely mind-blowing. I read this at a point in time where I really needed to read it. There's always books like that that come to you at the right time, and there was a character in this story that really meant a lot to me, that really made me feel, again, very seen while I was in the very beginning stages of some trauma resurfacing. And I just think that Erikson really understands the human condition and is excellent at writing it. And I think each of these characters has so much to say, and the world is so vast and so immersive and just profound that this is a book that will stay with me forever, and it has left a huge impact on me both as a reader and a writer. I'm going to go back to my childhood and hold up a book that I still absolutely love. It really encouraged my obsession with Egyptian history when I was young, and that is The Golden Goblet by Eloise Jarvis McGraw. This is the story of a young boy who is being raised by his stepbrother, who is not a super nice person, who is a stonemason, and Ranifer, the young boy, has this dream of becoming a goldsmith, and he gets wrapped up in some of his older stepbrother's schemes, and things ensue. This was such a monumentally important book for me growing up because it really fostered, again, my love of not only Egyptian history, but ancient world history in general. And the characterization is so immersive and powerful and magnetizing in this little book. Eloise Jarvis McGraw was one of my favorite writers growing up, and I still absolutely love her work, and I'm very excited to read this very soon with my son. But I highly recommend this for anybody who is interested in upper middle grade historical fiction. Next up, I cannot have a top 10 list without mentioning my favorite classic, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is another book written by a young woman who was so far ahead of her time, and wow, like just the depth in this story. This is a classic that I recommend to a lot of people that haven't read a lot of classics before and might be interested in just kind of dipping a toe in, because I think the themes of humanity and who we are and what it means to love and be loved and just to be, which is very vague, but I think that there are some really powerful human themes at the center of Frankenstein that can appeal to a wide variety of people and situations. And I just love this book. I remember reading it for the first time in my Intro to Fiction class in college and just being enraptured by the story and the way that it was told and the plight of the monster throughout the story, and it really left a big impact on me as a writer and also as a reader. So I would be remiss to have this top 10 list without including Frankenstein on it. Next up, you guys knew it was coming. I have to hold up my favorite Red Rising book, and this is Morning Star Book 3 in the first Red Rising trilogy by Pierce Brown. This is a series that I have read probably more than any other series on my shelves since I was a kid. I love Red Rising. You guys know this. I'm preaching to the choir, I realize. I love this series. I love it so much. It is my comfort series. If I was abandoned on an island somewhere and I could only bring one book or one series, it would be this one, because I can read this over and over and over again and not get tired of it. These characters feel like coming home every time I open the pages, and Morning Star is just the most incredible ending to a trilogy ever. It's so good. It's so good. I love it so much. I love these characters. I love this story. I love it. I love it. I love it. And that's all I'm going to say about it because I have waxed poetic about this series on my channel many, many times. Last, but certainly not least, I think is the book that if I had to pick my favorite book of all time in terms of just A, how many times I've read it, B, how much it has impacted me as a person, both as a writer, a reader, and just a person in general. A book that has been with me the longest and has kept the level of impact for the longest time in my life. It's gonna have to be White Fang by Jack London. This is a book that made me a character writer. This is a book that showed me what incredibly deep and layered characterization looked like for the first time when I was young. White Fang, as weird as it may sound, is one of the most powerful depictions of overcoming I think I've ever read. Now, are there some things in this book that may be a struggle for modern readers to get through? Absolutely. But when it comes to just the main character's story arc in this book, I could not love this book more. I have read this so many times, and I really recommend other people read it. If you're interested in classics, if you're interested in powerful character storytelling, White Fang is a book that will never ever leave me, and it has really set me on a path to being a more empathetic person, to being a more empathetic and layered reader and writer, and I couldn't love this book more. There you have it, you guys. Those are my top 10 books of all time. I hope that you enjoyed this list. I felt pretty good about the just variety of it. I think there's a few books that I could see being, replaced by something else in the future at some point. But this was the stack that felt right. This was the one that after a couple of weeks of tinkering around with it just felt like the most me stack of books. And obviously there are so many other books on my shelves that I love to bits and pieces that don't fit in a top 10, that deserve lots of love and attention, and I talk about those on my channel all the time as well, so, just keep watching my videos and I'm sure I will talk more about them. But I would love to know down in the comments below if it is possible for you to pick a top 5, a top 10, your favorite book of all time. Let me know down in the comments because I would love to see your favorites as well. So, I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope that you are reading some 5-star reads or rereading an old favorite, and I'll see you in the next video.